Story 1. A winter valley he shouldn't have entered. A winter shortcut through a ravine, and a man standing there, armed, silent, and waiting. My name is Caleb. I used to do a lot of solo survival trips during winter. This was the last one. It was midwinter. The ground was almost frozen solid, with just a thin dusting of snow on top. Cold but dry, the kind of cold you can work with. I'd been walking for hours through the woods with my shotgun, looking for birds and finding nothing. No tracks, no movement, just trees and silence. After another hour, the forest thinned and opened into a valley. It wasn't part of my plan, but I saw a narrow trail cutting through a ravine, leading to another clearing on the other side. The day was getting late. Circling around would cost me at least another hour. The slope down looked steep, but manageable. So I took it. As soon as I started descending, I realized I'd underestimated it. My boots crunched against frozen ground, but every step had to be careful, slow, deliberate. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The ravine walls rose on both sides, and the trees leaned inward, blocking what little light was left. The cold started to seep into my bones, but it wasn't the cold that made my stomach tighten. Something about that place felt wrong. That's when I saw him. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the trail, about 50 yards ahead of me. Not moving, not shifting his weight, just standing there. He was holding what looked like a civilian AR, raised and ready like he'd been waiting for something to step into view. When I saw him, my body locked up. This wasn't a hiker. This wasn't a hunter. His clothes were filthy layers of mismatched jackets and pants hanging loosely off a skinny frame. He looked gaunt, starved, like he hadn't eaten properly in a long time. But it was his eyes that froze me. They were sunken, dark, and the moment I noticed him, they locked onto me. I couldn't move. My brain screamed at me to turn around and run, but my legs refused. My shotgun was still slung over my shoulder. I felt the strap start to slip, and the thought of that terrified me. If the gun fell, he might think I was raising it. And if he thought that, he might not wait to find out. Slowly, painfully, slowly, I adjusted the strap. Every movement controlled. Careful, non-threatening. He didn't react, didn't blink, didn't shift. The air felt heavy, pressed down. I wanted to speak, to say anything, but my mouth wouldn't open. So instead, I took a step backward, then another. The crunch of snow beneath my boots sounded impossibly loud. I didn't turn my back. I didn't run. I watched him the entire time as I backed away, step by step. He never followed. But even after the trail curved and he disappeared from sight, I could still feel his eyes on me. The moment I climbed out of the ravine, everything changed. The cold eased. The forest felt normal again. I didn't stop moving until I was far enough away to breathe. That night, sitting by my fire, I replayed it over and over. It didn't make sense. Deer season wasn't open. AR-style rifles aren't legal for hunting in that area. And he didn't look like a man who belonged in the woods. He looked like someone who hadn't been part of the world in a long time. So long that something else had taken his place. The next morning, I reported it to the sheriff. He listened, nodded, said they'd check it out. Weeks passed. I never heard back. I've never gone back to that valley, because I don't think he was hunting deer or anything else. Whoever was down there didn't want me there, and I'm more than happy to respect that. Story 2. The house that chose my aunt. My aunt didn't change overnight, the house changed first. My name is Rachel. I never believed in possession. Not really. Not until I saw my aunt lift something she should never have been able to move, and smile like it didn't cost her anything at all. She had always been strict, not cruel, just firm. The kind of person who never needed to raise her voice. When she spoke, people listened. That was the first thing that disappeared. The change didn't come suddenly. And that's what made it dangerous. Slow changes give you time to explain them away. They let you convince yourself you're imagining things. At first, it was her sleep. She stopped resting properly, woke up tired, sat in silence longer than usual. Sometimes, she would stare into corners of rooms, like she was waiting for something to finish speaking before she moved again. Then came her strength. She started moving furniture on her own. Heavy things. Things she had always asked for help with before. When we pointed it out, she brushed it off, like it wasn't worth noticing, like the effort hadn't even registered. That's when the house started to change too. Not darker, not colder, just aware. Sound didn't behave the same way anymore. Noise felt like it stopped once it entered a room. At night, we heard movement that didn't belong to anyone. Slow, heavy, deliberate, not hiding, not announcing itself, just present. Whenever we asked her about it, she said the same thing. The house settles at night. The exact same words. Every time. Like something she had practiced until it sounded natural. The first time I felt real fear was during an argument. She grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not angry, just firm. I tried to pull away. I couldn't. Her grip didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. She smiled while holding me. That smile didn't belong to her. After that, things escalated faster. Not suddenly. With purpose. Like something had realized it didn't need to pretend anymore. She started speaking differently. Slower. Heavier. Like each word was being chosen by someone who had just learned how to use her mouth. Sometimes she spoke to people who weren't there, responded to questions no one had asked, nodded slightly, like she was listening to instructions, and the house reacted with her. Doors opened on their own. Objects shifted. Sounds followed her from room to room, like the space itself was paying attention. We brought people to help her, not doctors, not at first. People who believed in prayer, in cleansing, in protection. They arrived confident. They left quieter. One of them told us the house didn't feel empty, that whatever was there hadn't arrived recently. It had been waiting long enough to settle. When he said that, my aunt smiled. When they tried to pray, she laughed, not mocking, just amused. She told them they were standing in the wrong place. That's when I realized she knew things she shouldn't have known. Details about people she had never met. Fears they had never spoken out loud. She used that knowledge gently, never as a threat, just enough to let them know she was aware. At night, the sounds became clearer, voices layered on top of each other, speaking through her mouth, overlapping slightly, like the timing hadn't been fully decided yet. Children stopped wanting to visit. They said the house felt crowded, even when no one else was there. One night, I saw her standing in the hallway, completely still, facing the wall, whispering softly. When I asked who she was talking to, she turned slowly and said, "The house doesn't like to be ignored." That was the moment I understood something important. It wasn't just using her anymore. It belonged there, and she was part of how it stayed present. When things finally broke, it wasn't violent. It was quiet. She sat down in the living room and refused to stand again. She said the house didn't want her to leave. She said she was tired of fighting something that never sleeps. We moved her out eventually. Not forcefully, not dramatically, quietly, like people leaving a place they know doesn't want them anymore. The moment she left, the house didn't relax. It tightened, like something had been interrupted mid-sentence. Even now, when I pass by that house, the rooms still feel wrong. The sounds stay close. Sometimes, I swear, I hear her voice from inside, speaking calmly, like she never left. The worst part isn't what happened to her. The worst part is knowing whatever learned how to use her is still there, waiting, not for her, for someone else strong enough to stay. Story 3. The Cage with No Door. A remote winter campsite reveals signs of long-term occupation and a metal cage with no exit hidden deep in the forest. My name is Evan. I didn't plan to camp there. I found it by accident, and for a few minutes, I honestly thought it was just someone else's mess. It was deep winter in north-central Pennsylvania, the kind of cold where the air feels clean, almost sharp, remote enough that getting there meant an hour of dirt roads, then a long hike on a trail so faint it barely counted as one. That was the point. I wanted isolation, silence, the kind of trip where your mind slows down because there's nothing around to react to. But the trail didn't feel empty. Not because I heard anything, because I didn't. No birds, no squirrels, no wind moving through branches the way it normally does. Just that strange, flat quiet, like the forest was holding its breath and waiting for me to make a sound first. I followed the trail along a creek that cut through a rocky valley. The terrain was brutal. Ice patches, thick snow over uneven stones. Every step had to be a decision. By late afternoon, the sun was already dropping behind the trees, and the temperature started falling fast. That's when I reached a fork in the creek. On the far side was a patch of flat ground that looked almost too perfect, like someone had picked it out on purpose. I crossed carefully, stepping stone to stone, and climbed up onto the flat section. That's when I saw the first sign. A tarp, not folded, not packed, spread out on the snow like someone had tossed it down and never came back for it. Then a fire ring, stones arranged in a circle, ash inside, blackened and old. And beside it, a log that had been chopped clean in half. Not split naturally, not broken, chopped. I stood there a moment, letting that sink in. because the trail had been empty. No footprints, no signs of hikers. But this was a campsite, recent enough that it still felt used. I walked closer. That's when I noticed the pile of gear, food wrappers, a small cooking set, a foam sleeping pad, a first aid kit. All the stuff someone would take on a winter trip, left behind like trash. And that's when I felt the first real chill that had nothing to do with weather. Because people don't abandon gear like that unless something interrupts them. And interruptions out here don't usually come with warnings. I kept walking, scanning the area. Near the creek, I found clothes piled on the ground. A jacket, a shirt, a towel draped over a branch. Damp. Not soaking. Not frozen solid either. Just heavy with yesterday's moisture. They weren't fresh enough to have been dropped minutes ago, but they weren't old enough to be forgotten. It looked like someone had undressed and planned to come back, and then didn't. My jaw tightened. My brain tried to do what it always does in moments like that. Build a normal explanation. Maybe someone left in a hurry. Maybe they got hurt and walked out. Maybe they just didn't care. But that quiet around me didn't feel like nobody cares. It felt like nobody's allowed to care. I took another step forward and noticed something else. Toilet paper. At first, just a few scraps, then more, scattered across the snow like a trail of carelessness. Some stained, some soaked, not one or two pieces, a lot. Enough that it wasn't a single day, enough that someone had been living here, using this exact spot over and over for weeks. And then my eyes caught a shape behind a cluster of trees. Metal. I moved slowly, my heart starting to thump harder than it should have. Behind the trees was a structure about 4 feet square. A cube frame made from welded metal bars. Like a cage, except it didn't make sense. There was no door, no hatch, no opening, no gap wide enough for anything to get in or out. Just bars, welded solid, a cage with no exit. I stood there staring at it, feeling my brain try to reject what my eyes were seeing. Because you don't build that out here. You don't drag something like that miles into the wilderness unless you plan to use it. And you don't build a cage with no door unless whatever goes in isn't meant to leave. Or whatever it's meant to keep out isn't human. I backed away slowly. I looked around again, really looked, and that's when I realized something that made my skin go cold. The camp didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like someone stepped away for a moment and expected to come back. My mind replayed every detail. No tent, but gear, clothes, food wrappers, weeks of signs. Like someone was living here without sleeping like a normal person. Like they didn't need comfort. I checked the tree line again. Still no wind, no animals, no movement. But the silence felt closer now, as if the forest had noticed I'd seen it. I had a choice. Turn back and hike out before dark. Or stay, because daylight was almost gone and moving in winter darkness is how you die. The smart part of me said, leave. The tired part of me said, it's probably nothing. Just a weird off-grid person. Just an old project. just trash. But there was one detail I couldn't ignore. If a person built that cage, they were still close enough to come back. And if they didn't build it, then what did? I decided to stay anyway. Not because I wanted to. Because winter punishes panic. I set my tent up farther from the cage, closer to the creek. Built a fire. Kept the flames low, like I didn't want to announce myself too loudly. And even with firelight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I barely slept. Every time the fire cracked, I woke. Every time snow shifted off a branch, I grabbed my knife. I kept expecting footsteps, but I didn't hear footsteps. What I heard was worse. Something moving through snow without snapping branches. A slow, deliberate pressure, like weight shifting, carefully. Not clumsy, not animal, intentional. Once, I heard something metal, not a bang, not a hit, a faint, dry vibration, like a fingertip tapping a bar, from the direction of the cage. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening so hard my head hurt. Nothing else happened. And that was the problem. Because whatever was out there didn't rush. It didn't test me. It just let me know it existed. By the time dawn arrived, I was already packed. I didn't eat breakfast. Didn't even put the fire out the right way. I shoveled snow over it and left. And I didn't look back until I was far enough away that I could breathe normally. When I got home, I called the Forest Service. I told them about the campsite, the clothes, the toilet paper, and the cage. The ranger sounded bored. He said it was probably a loner living off-grid. Maybe someone trying to disappear. Maybe an old operation. Maybe something left behind. But he didn't sound convinced. And neither was I. Because loners don't build cages with no exits. And if it was for wildlife, it wasn't built to catch animals. It was built like someone was afraid of what might come through. I never went back to that spot. Part of me wanted to understand, to confirm it was real. But the part of me that matters more, the part that keeps you alive, knew something simple. The woods aren't always empty. Sometimes you just arrive at the wrong place, while something else is mid-routine. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's what someone built, because they already knew what lives out there. Story 4. We thought camping together would be safer. My name is Daniel. I used to believe that being with someone made you safer in the woods. That as long as you weren't alone, nothing truly bad could happen. That belief didn't survive that trip. It was late autumn, cold, but not enough to snow yet. The kind of weather that makes sound travel farther than it should. I went camping with my friend Mark. We'd known each other for years, done plenty of trips together. Nothing extreme, just quiet places, a fire, and a night away from everything else. The trail was empty when we arrived. No other cars, no footprints, no voices drifting through the trees. We liked that. We hiked for a couple of hours before finding a spot near a shallow creek. It wasn't perfect, but it felt secluded enough to relax. That was the first mistake. We relaxed too early. As the sun dropped, the woods got quieter in a way that felt deliberate, not peaceful, restrained. like the forest was holding something back. We set up camp and got the fire going. Everything felt normal again once the flames were up. Light has a way of lying to you like that. Around dusk, we heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, not close, but close enough to be noticed. We both stopped talking. The steps didn't come toward us. They moved parallel to the creek, somewhere beyond the trees. Mark laughed it off. "Probably a deer," he said. "Too heavy for a deer," I thought, but I didn't say it. A few minutes later, we heard it again. Same pace, same direction. Still no animal sounds. No snapping branches, just footsteps. That's when I realized something else. They weren't wandering. They were pacing, back and forth, like someone deciding whether or not to approach. Dark came fast after that. The fire became the only thing that felt real. That's when a voice spoke from the trees. Not shouting, not whispering, just normal. "Evening." It came from just outside the firelight. We both froze. Mark answered before I could stop him. Said hello back. Asked who was there. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Didn't mean to scare you, just passing through." I never saw the person. The firelight didn't reach far enough, and whoever it was didn't step closer. They asked if we were staying the night. Mark said yes. Another pause. Then the voice said, "Brave," and walked away. We listened to the footsteps disappear. Mark laughed again, but it was thinner this time. Forced. I asked if he thought that was weird. He shrugged and said people say weird things in the woods. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Later that night, after the fire burned low, we heard movement again. Closer this time. Circling. Not hiding. Not rushing. Just walking. One set of steps. Then another. 2 different rhythms. That's when we realized there wasn't just one person out there anymore. Mark whispered that maybe they were just other campers. But no one ever called out again. No flashlights. No voices. Just footsteps. And the sound of something shifting weight, like someone standing still for too long. At some point, the steps stopped. The silence after was worse, because it felt expectant, like something had decided. Mark said we should pack up and leave. I agreed instantly. We started stuffing things into our packs without caring how loud we were. That's when something moved closer, fast. Branches cracked. Footsteps rushed forward. Not running, charging. We both grabbed our lights and shined them into the trees. Nothing, but the sound stopped instantly, like it had never been there at all. We didn't stay. We didn't even finish packing properly. We walked back down the trail with our lights sweeping constantly, hearts pounding, listening for anything behind us. Nothing followed. At least, nothing we could hear. When we reached the car, we didn't talk. We just drove. Later, Mark told me something he hadn't said out loud that night. When the voice spoke earlier, he said it didn't come from one place. It came from 2, slightly out of sync. Like someone else was repeating the words a half-second late. We never went back to that area. And I don't believe anymore that being with someone makes you safer. Sometimes, it just means there's more for something to watch. Story 5. We shouldn't have stayed that night. A remote campsite, a simple decision to stay, and the moment we realized someone had already claimed the area. My name is Lucas. This wasn't supposed to be a scary trip. It wasn't even supposed to be memorable. It was just one night. That's what we kept telling ourselves. My girlfriend and I had been driving for hours when we found the spot. A small clearing near the edge of a national forest. No marked campsites. No signs. Just trees, silence, and the kind of isolation that feels peaceful at first. The sun was already low, and we didn't feel like driving any farther. That should have been our warning. We set up the tent quickly. The woods felt normal while there was still light, but as soon as it got dark, something changed. Not the temperature, not the wind, the sound. Everything felt closer. Every rustle felt intentional. Every small noise felt placed. My girlfriend asked if I could hear that. I told her it was probably animals. I didn't believe myself. Around midnight, we heard footsteps. Not near the tent. Not far either. Slow, measured, stopping, then starting again. Whoever it was wasn't walking past. They were lingering. We stayed quiet, listening. Then a flashlight clicked on in the distance. It swept across the trees once, twice, then turned off. No voices, no approach, just darkness again. My girlfriend whispered that maybe it was a ranger. But rangers don't sneak around campsites at midnight. We decided to leave. Right then, as I reached for the zipper, something scraped against the side of the tent. Not hard, not aggressive, just enough to let us know it was there. Neither of us moved. A few seconds passed. Then, footsteps walked away, slowly, like whoever it was knew we were awake. We waited until dawn. Neither of us slept. When the light finally returned, we packed up and left without looking back. As we drove away, I noticed something I wish I hadn't. Our tire tracks from the night before, and another set beside them, leading in, not out. Story 6. Someone was already there. Two hikers realized too late that the man they met in the woods wasn't lost, curious, or passing through. He was checking if the place was free. My name is Aaron. This wasn't a ghost story. There was nothing paranormal about it. That's the part that still keeps me awake. My friend Lucas and I had gone hiking in a stretch of forest we'd visited more than once. Remote, yes, but familiar. The kind of place that feels empty, because it usually is. We parked near the old trailhead just after noon. No other cars, no fresh tire tracks. That should have felt normal. Instead, it felt like confirmation. The trail was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, not peaceful, contained. About 40 minutes in, Lucas pointed something out. Footprints. Not animal, not old, human, fresh. They weren't following the trail exactly. They drifted in and out of it, as if whoever made them didn't care about staying on path. We joked about it at first. Another hiker, maybe someone camping nearby. That explanation lasted until we found the fire ring. The ashes were still warm, not glowing, not smoking, just warm enough that you could feel it without touching. Lucas checked his watch. We both did the math. Someone had been there recently, very recently. We considered turning back. Instead, we kept going. That was our first mistake. 10 minutes later, we saw him. He was standing just off the trail, half hidden between the trees. Not stepping out, not waving, waiting. He was older than us, maybe late 40s, wearing clothes that looked lived in rather than worn out. Clean boots, no visible pack. He smiled when we stopped. Not a friendly smile. Not threatening either. Neutral, like he was observing our reaction. "Afternoon," he said. We answered. He asked where we were headed. Lucas said the name of a nearby overlook. The man nodded slowly. Too slowly. Then he asked how long we planned to stay. That question landed wrong. Lucas hesitated just a beat too long before saying we were just passing through. No overnight. The man's smile faltered, just for a moment. Then it came back. "You should move quick," he said. "Weather turns fast out here." The sky was clear. No clouds. No wind. He stepped aside and let us pass. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then Lucas said it. That guy didn't belong out here. I agreed. Something about the way he'd asked questions felt structured, like he wasn't making conversation, like he was collecting information. We decided to cut the hike short. When we turned around, I noticed something behind us. Footprints, fresh, matching the man's boots. They weren't ahead of us anymore. They were behind us, overlapping our steps. He hadn't gone his own way. He'd followed us. We picked up our pace. So did the footsteps. Never closer, never farther. Perfectly matched. Lucas whispered, "Don't run." Running would change the situation. We kept walking. When we reached the trailhead, the footsteps stopped. No sound of someone turning away. No movement through brush. Just absence. We got into the car and drove without speaking. 10 minutes down the road, Lucas finally checked his phone. No signal. Then it buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You left early." We didn't stop the car. Later that night, Lucas called me. He said he couldn't stop thinking about one detail. The man never asked our names, never introduced himself. He didn't need to, because he wasn't meeting us. He was checking availability. And when we left, we weren't escaping. We were giving the place back. Story 7. The snow didn't sound right. A simple winter camping trip turns wrong when the forest starts answering their movements. They realize too late that staying still isn't fear, it's survival. My name is Nolan. I learned the hard way that winter silence isn't empty. It just hides things better. I went camping with my friend Tyler in late January, a few hours outside town, at a spot he swore was safe because he'd been there twice before. It was one of those places people recommended when they wanted to sound like they knew wilderness. An old access road, a trail that ran along a frozen creek, and a small clearing that was perfect for a tent. The forecast said light snow, maybe an inch, nothing serious. That's what we told ourselves as we loaded the car and drove out before sunrise, the heater blasting, coffee steaming in the cup holders, both of us feeling like we'd outsmarted winter by arriving prepared. The trailhead was empty. No other cars, no footprints, no fresh tracks. Tyler said, "See, told you, nobody comes out this far when it's cold." I didn't answer right away because the quiet felt too clean, like the air had been wiped down. Even the wind sounded like it was being careful. We hiked in for about an hour and found the clearing. It was exactly as he described: flat ground, a ring of trees like a wall, and the creek nearby buried under ice and snow. The only sound was the occasional crack of frozen wood shifting somewhere deeper in the forest. We set up our tent, started a small fire, and did what people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're having a good time, joking too loudly, moving too much, talking about dumb things. Then Tyler stopped and looked at me. "Did you hear that?" I listened. Nothing. He pointed toward the trees to our left. It sounded like footsteps. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because that's what you do when you don't want a thought to stick. "It's snow," I said. "Branches, animals." Tyler didn't laugh back. "Yeah," he said, "probably." But his eyes stayed on the tree line like he expected something to step out and apologize. We ate early. As the light drained from the sky, the temperature dropped hard. The air felt sharper, as if every breath shaved something off the inside of my throat. The fire helped, but not in the way you want. The fire didn't make us feel safe. It made us feel visible. By 9, the snow started falling thicker. Not a storm, not yet, just steady, quiet flakes that made everything softer and darker. We agreed to turn in, zipped ourselves into sleeping bags, and tried to sleep while the forest pressed in around us. That's when it happened. A crunch. Not loud, not sudden. Just close enough that my eyes opened instantly. Tyler whispered my name. "Nolan." I didn't respond. I just lay there and listened. Another crunch, then another. Slow, measured, the sound of weight shifting in dry snow. It was circling the tent, not sprinting, not prowling, walking, like it had time. Tyler's breathing changed. I could hear it even through the fabric. Shorter, tight, controlled, like he was trying to breathe quietly without realizing he was doing it. We both knew the difference between an animal and a person. Animals don't pace like that. Animals don't keep a consistent distance. This did. I reached for my phone. No signal. Tyler mouthed, "Bear?" I shook my head. A bear would have sniffed, scratched, snorted, tested. This thing just walked. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Then it stopped, right beside Tyler's side of the tent. The fabric shifted inward slightly, as if something had leaned close. Not enough to touch him, but enough to let him know it could. Tyler froze so hard I could feel the stillness coming off him like heat. And then, outside, very softly, there was a sound that made my stomach drop. A breath. Not wind. Not an exhale into cold air. A deliberate inhale, close to the fabric, like someone smelling the tent. Tyler's eyes widened. My entire body screamed to sit up, to shout, to do something. But my mind did the math faster. If we reacted, we confirmed we were in here. If we stayed still, We were just objects. So I stared at Tyler and put one finger to my lips. Don't. The breath happened again. Closer. Then a quiet scraping sound moved along the fabric, slow and controlled, as if a hand or something shaped like one was dragging lightly over the tent wall. Tyler's mouth opened. I shook my head harder. No sound. The scraping stopped. For a long time, nothing happened. And that nothing was worse than the walking, because it felt like waiting. Tyler's eyelids fluttered, panicked, and I could tell he was close to breaking. Then, outside, the crunching started again, but it wasn't circling anymore. It was moving away, straight away, down the path we'd hiked in on, like it had finished checking something. Tyler whispered, barely audible, "Is it gone?" I still didn't answer, because the moment you say something out loud, you make your presence real. We lay there, motionless, for what felt like hours, listening for any shift in the snow, any change in the air. The falling snow didn't stop. It thickened. Around midnight, the crunching returned. Only this time, it came from the trees. Not from the trail. From behind the tent, where the clearing met the forest. Closer. Quieter. Less careless. Tyler's hand found my arm in the dark and squeezed hard enough to hurt. The step stopped again, right at the edge of the clearing. And then, from somewhere just beyond our fire pit, something made a sound I can't properly describe without lying. It wasn't a voice, but it wasn't an animal either. It was like someone tried to imitate a human noise without understanding how humans make it, like a throat remembering a sound it had heard once. A soft, broken cough. Tyler covered his mouth with his sleeve. I felt my heart hammering so hard it made my vision pulse. The cough came again, slightly improved, like practice. Then it stopped. No more steps, no more breath, no more scraping. Just the snow falling, covering everything in quiet. But the quiet didn't feel normal. It felt arranged. At some point, exhaustion took me in pieces. Not sleep, more like my brain turning off for seconds at a time. When morning finally came, the world looked innocent. White ground, pale sky, a weak sun behind clouds. Tyler crawled out first, holding the hatchet like it was a joke he didn't want to admit he believed in. He scanned the clearing, then looked down. Footprints. Not animal, not boot prints either. They were wrong in subtle ways. Too long in the heel, too shallow in the toe. Like something that didn't bend the way a foot should. And there were no prints circling the tent. None. Only one set leading up to Tyler's side, and then turning and walking away. But the part that made my blood go cold was this. The prints didn't come from the trail. They came from the trees, straight into the clearing, as if it had been standing out there long before we arrived, watching the place, waiting for us to make it bright. Tyler stared at them for a long time, then said, "We're leaving." No argument, no breakfast, no packing neatly. We shoved gear into bags, kicked snow over the fire, and started hiking out. Halfway down the trail, Tyler stopped and looked back at the forest. "Last night," he said quietly, "I think it wanted us to talk. I didn't ask why, because I already knew. Some things don't attack you first. They study what you give them. Your voice, your rhythm, your panic. And if you give them enough, they don't need to chase. They can wait. We never camped there again. And I don't camp in deep winter anymore. Not because of the cold, because now, when snow falls at night, I listen for the sound underneath it. The sound that doesn't belong. The crunch that pauses at the edge of the light and decides whether you're worth approaching. Story 8. The ranger station light wasn't for me. Lost in a whiteout, he follows a warm light to safety. But the station doesn't show up on any map, and the person inside seems to know things he never said out loud. My name is Carter. I don't camp in winter anymore. Not because of bears, not because of snowstorms, because of what the cold does to your judgment, and what waits for you to make a mistake. It happened on a 2-night trip I should have canceled the moment the sky turned that color. You know, the one flat, heavy gray, like the clouds are pressed down so low they're rubbing against the treetops. I went with a friend. His name was Ben. We weren't experienced enough to call ourselves survival guys, but we'd done plenty of weekends, and we weren't idiots. We had layers, food, a stove, and a plan. The plan mattered because in winter you don't get to improvise for long. We parked at the trailhead just after lunch. The air was still, not peaceful, still like a room holding its breath. Ben said, "Perfect weather." I remember looking at him, then at the sky, and thinking, perfect weather doesn't feel like this. But we were already there, and people have this stubborn need to prove they didn't drive all that way for nothing. We hiked in about 3 miles and found a spot tucked behind a line of spruce trees, close enough to a creek that we could melt snow without struggling, far enough from the water that we wouldn't freeze ourselves from the ground up. We built a small fire, set the tent, and settled into that familiar rhythm: gather wood, stamp snow flat, talk about dumb things, pretend the dark doesn't change how the woods feel. By evening, the wind started. Not a gust, not a breeze. A steady push. It threaded through branches and made the trees creak in a way that sounded like old doors. Ben kept looking into the woods like he'd heard something. I asked him once, "You good?" He shrugged, but didn't look at me. "Yeah, just feels like somebody's out there." I laughed because I didn't want to say what I was thinking. The woods don't feel like that for no reason. That night, the temperature dropped hard. Our breath fogged the tent walls. The stove hissed softly, and for a while I started to relax. Then Ben whispered, "Carter." I turned my head. "What?" He didn't answer right away. And when he did, his voice was different, small, tight. "Listen." At first, I heard nothing. Then I caught it. Footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, heavy, too deliberate. Not a squirrel, not a deer, and too spaced out to be a person walking normally. It sounded like someone taking their time, like they weren't worried about being heard. The steps stopped just outside the tent. Ben's hand found my sleeve. His grip was cold and shaking. I held my breath and listened for the follow-up. Sniffing, scratching, the impatient movement you'd expect from something animal. But nothing followed, just quiet. Then, right beside the tent wall, there was a faint tap. Not loud, not aggressive. A single, soft knock. Ben's eyes widened so hard I could see white around the irises even in the dim light of our headlamps. Another knock. Same spot. Then a third. It wasn't random. It was measured. Like a question. I remember thinking something I hate admitting. I thought, it wants us to answer. Ben mouthed, "Person?" I shook my head. A person would call out. A person would say something. This didn't. It just waited. After a minute, the footsteps moved again, slowly circling, keeping the same radius, as if it was learning the shape of our little shelter. Then, suddenly, the wind surged. The trees groaned. Snow hissed against the tent, and the footsteps vanished under the noise like they'd never been there. Ben exhaled shakily. "We should leave." "Now?" I whispered. He nodded. "Now." We didn't pack carefully. We shoved things into bags, stomped out the fire as best we could, and started walking back toward the trailhead with headlamps bouncing and breath burning. The wind got worse. Within 15 minutes, the trail began disappearing under fresh snow. Within 30, we couldn't tell if we were still on it. We tried to backtrack, but our prints were filling in behind us like the forest was erasing evidence. Ben stopped, turned in a slow circle, and said something that hit harder than the cold. "I don't recognize anything." I pulled out my phone again. No signal. Compass. The needle jittered slightly, not spinning, but not steady either. I told myself it was nerves. But the truth is, there are moments when your body knows something your brain refuses to accept, and my body felt like it was being guided somewhere. The wind turned our headlamp beams into weak cones of light. Snow whipped sideways. Every tree became the same tree. We tried to stay calm, but panic is a quiet thing. At first, small decisions made too quickly. Shortcuts that feel smart until they aren't. Ben started coughing from the cold air. "Just keep moving," I told him. "We'll find the road." Then the light appeared. At first, it was so faint I thought it was a trick of my vision, just snow reflecting off my own headlamp. But then it steadied. A warm, yellow glow. Not moonlight, not headlamp light. A real light like a window. Ben grabbed my arm. "You see that?" I nodded, and something inside me loosened. Because when you're lost in a whiteout, any sign of human structure feels like a miracle. We moved toward it. The light didn't get brighter the way it should have as we approached. It stayed consistent, like it wasn't a place we were getting closer to, like it was a point the darkness was holding open. Then shapes appeared. A small wooden building, half buried in snow drifts, with a single lit window and a door that looked too new for how old the walls were. A ranger station. That was the first thought my brain offered, and I grabbed it because I needed it to be true. We stumbled up to the door, and I pounded on it with my gloved fist. The knock sounded wrong, too flat, like the wood was thicker than it should have been. Ben leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I knocked again. The door opened almost immediately. No creak, no delay, just open. Warm air rolled out like a wave. A man stood there holding a lantern, even though there was already electric light inside. He was dressed like a ranger, dark jacket, heavy boots, hat pulled low. But something about the uniform felt off. Too clean, too complete. like it was a costume someone had put together from an idea of a ranger, not a real one. He looked at us and said, "You took the wrong trail." His voice wasn't surprised. It wasn't even curious. It sounded like he'd been waiting for that exact mistake. I tried to speak, but my throat was tight. We got turned around." He nodded once, slow. "It happens." Ben stepped inside before I did. The warmth pulled him like gravity. The interior was small, one room, a table, a stove, and a radio mounted on the wall. But there were no maps, no papers, no clutter. A ranger station without mess feels like a church without dust. The man closed the door behind us and set the lantern on the table. Then he looked directly at Ben and said, "Sit down. Your hands are starting to go." Ben stared at him. "What? What?" The man didn't answer the question. He just reached under the table and pulled out a blanket like he'd known exactly where it was. He wrapped it around Ben's shoulders with an efficiency that didn't feel kind. It felt practiced. I looked toward the radio. "Can you call someone?" The man turned his head slightly, like he'd heard that request 1,000 times. "Not tonight," he said. I frowned. "Why not?" He glanced at the window. Outside, the snow whipped past like static. "Because if I call," he said, "they'll come looking." My stomach tightened. "That's the point," I said. His eyes moved back to me. And the look he gave me was the first truly frightening thing that night. Not anger, not threat, just certainty. "They won't find you," he said. Ben sat up straighter. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't answer right away. He walked to the stove and adjusted it, even though it was already burning steadily. Then he said, casually, like he was commenting on the weather, "It hears people when they panic." I felt my scalp prickle. "What hears?" I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile you give when you're correcting someone who keeps making the same mistake. "The woods," he said, "when it's like this." Ben shook his head. "That's not a thing." The man looked at Ben's boots. Then, without looking up, he said, "You left your fire ring half buried. You didn't stamp the coals deep enough. That's why it followed you." Ben went still. I felt my mouth go dry. Because we hadn't told him that. We hadn't mentioned the campsite at all. The man finally looked up again. "And you," he said to me, "kept checking your phone, like the signal would save you." My hands tightened around my gloves. I said, "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "For tonight," he said, "I'm the place you found." That sentence landed wrong, not grammatically, spiritually, like it didn't belong in a human conversation. Ben stood up suddenly, the blanket sliding off his shoulders. "We're leaving," he said. The man didn't move. "Sit down," he said, calm. Ben took a step toward the door. And the light in the room flickered. Not the bulbs, not like electricity. Like the air itself blinked. I swear the room felt wider for a second, like the walls pulled away. Ben froze mid-step. Outside, something heavy crunched in the snow, right against the wall. Then another crunch, then a third. Ben looked at me with a terror that had no room left in it. The man spoke softly, almost kindly. "If you open that door, he said. "It will know you're still warm." Ben's lips parted, but no words came out. I stared at the door like it was the only thing keeping the world from spilling in. The crunching outside moved along the wall, slow, steady, then stopped at the window. A shadow passed across the glass. Not a clear shape, just a darker smear of darkness, like something tall leaned close enough to block the light. The man didn't look at it. He just poured water into 2 metal cups and set them on the table. Ben whispered, "What is it?" The man finally blinked, slow. "It's what winter grows," he said. "When people go quiet." I didn't know what to do with that, but my body understood it anyway. We sat. We drank. The water tasted faintly metallic, like it had been sitting in something old. Hours passed in a blur of heat and tension. The crunching outside came and went like it was pacing. Sometimes I thought I heard a soft tap on the wall again, 3 taps, spaced evenly. Sometimes I thought it was in my head, but the man never reacted, which somehow made it worse. Just before dawn, the wind eased. The snow softened from violent to steady. The man stood and nodded toward the door. "Now," he said. Ben looked at me, then at the window, then at the man. "You're coming with us?" Ben asked. The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "No," he said. "I don't go past my line." I hesitated. "What line?" He didn't answer. He opened the door. Cold air hit us hard, but the world looked calmer, gray morning light, drifting snow, trees standing still again. The man pointed. "There," he said, "trail." And there it was clear, visible, like it had been waiting 5 feet away this whole time. Ben stepped out first. I followed. Then I turned back to say something, thank you, maybe, or to ask again who he was. But the building, it wasn't there. The door was open to nothing. Just snow and trees. No wall. No window. No light. No ranger station. Ben saw my face and followed my gaze. "What?" he asked. I couldn't speak, because if I said it out loud, it became real. We walked out in silence. We found the trailhead. We found the car. We drove for an hour before Ben finally said, "We were in there, right?" I didn't answer, because the way he asked sounded like he already knew the truth, that we had been somewhere, but not somewhere that stays. To this day, I check maps. I check ranger stations. I check satellite images. There's nothing in that area. No building, no structure, just forest. And that's why I don't camp in winter anymore. Because when you're lost and freezing, you will follow any light that promises warmth. And sometimes, the light isn't there to save you. Sometimes, it's there to keep you still. Story 9. It didn't want me lost. He thought something was stalking him in the snow, until he realized it was guiding him instead. My name is Ethan. I need to be clear about something from the start. Whatever happened to me out there didn't feel hostile. That's the part that still bothers me. I was driving home late one night in early winter. Not deep winter, just that in-between season where snow comes and goes, and the roads look harmless until they aren't. I took a back road to save time. I'd driven it dozens of times before. Narrow, wooded, barely any traffic, but usually fine. That night, It started snowing harder than expected. Not a storm, just enough to blur the edges of things. The radio crackled in and out. My phone lost signal about 10 minutes in. I remember thinking I should turn back, but the road ahead looked the same as the road behind. That's how people get stuck, not by danger, by symmetry. About halfway through, my headlights caught something in the road. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then I slowed down. It was a person, standing in the middle of the lane. I hit the brakes and slid a little before stopping several yards away. The man didn't move, didn't wave, didn't react to the car at all. He just stood there, facing me. I rolled the window down slightly and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. Snow drifted between us. I remember thinking how odd it was that he wasn't shielding his face from the cold. No gloves, no hood pulled tight, just standing there like the temperature didn't apply to him. I flashed my high beams once. That's when he turned his head, slowly. Not startled, not defensive, just enough to look directly at me. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with fear, more like recognition. The sense that something had noticed me specifically. Then he raised his arm and pointed, not at me, down the road behind him. I hesitated. He pointed again, more insistently this time. I cracked the door open and shouted, "What's wrong?" He lowered his arm, took one step backward, and disappeared into the snow between the trees. Not ran, not ducked, just gone. I sat there longer than I should have, staring at the empty road. Every instinct told me to leave. I put the car in drive and followed the direction he'd pointed. Less than a mile later, the road collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a crash, just ended. A section had washed out beneath the snow, leaving a drop I wouldn't have seen until it was too late. I stared at it, heart pounding. If I'd kept going the way I was originally heading, I would have driven straight into it. I backed up slowly, carefully, and turned around. That's when my car stalled. The engine coughed once and died. The light stayed on, but the dashboard flickered like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Snow started to fall thicker. The road was silent. No wind. No animals. Just that soft, smothering quiet that eats sound. I stayed in the car at first, called for help, even though I knew there was no signal. Turned the heater off and on, trying to make it last. Then I saw footprints, leading away from my car. Fresh. They hadn't been there a minute before. They went off the road, into the trees. I didn't want to follow them. Every horror instinct I had screamed not to. But staying in the car felt wrong too, like waiting was the worst option. I grabbed my coat, locked the car out of habit, and followed the prints. They weren't deep, just enough to show direction. Every so often, they would pause. Not stop completely, just hesitate. As if whoever made them was checking that I was still behind. That thought made my skin crawl. The woods grew thicker than they should have for how short the walk felt. The snow seemed quieter here, like it was falling into something that absorbed sound. Then I saw a light. Not bright, not warm, Just steady. A single glow ahead through the trees. I almost laughed from relief, until I realized something. The footprints stopped about 10 feet before the light. They didn't go toward it. They ended. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the glow. A small cabin came into focus. Old, weathered, but intact. The door was closed. No smoke from the chimney. The light came from a single window. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. The door opened. The man from the road stood there. Same clothes, same calm expression. Not out of breath. Not cold. Like he'd been waiting inside the whole time. "You shouldn't stay out here," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried easily. "I didn't know where else to go," I replied. He studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "You're losing heat." The inside of the cabin was warmer than it should have been. Not cozy, not hot. Just regulated. There was no clutter, no personal items, no food. Just a chair, a table, a lantern, and that same light. I sat. He didn't. "You saved me back there," I said. He shook his head. "I redirected you." That phrasing stuck with me. I swallowed. "Why?" He looked at me then. Really looked. "Because you were paying attention," he said. "That matters." I didn't know what to say to that. I asked him who he was. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Some people panic when they realize they're lost. They fight the place. They run." "And you?" I asked. "I listen," he said. Something about that felt rehearsed, not like a lie, but like a rule. I checked my watch. The hands weren't moving. I frowned. "How long have I been here?" He glanced at the window. "Long enough." A sound came from outside then. A low, distant crack. Then another. Like ice shifting under weight. The man tilted his head, listening. "You need to leave soon," he said. "Where?" I asked. He pointed toward the back of the cabin. "There's a road you can reach before morning," he said. "If you walk steady." I stood, uneasy. "You're not coming." He smiled faintly. "I don't cross that part," he said. "Why not?" "Because it's not for me." I opened my mouth to ask what that meant, and the cabin lights went out. Not darkness. Not completely. Just absence. I blinked. The walls weren't there. The warmth vanished. I was standing in the snow, alone. No cabin, no light, no man. Just a narrow path through the trees that hadn't been there before. I walked for what felt like hours. But my body didn't get as tired as it should have. The cold didn't bite as deep. Like something was moderating the experience. Eventually, I reached a road. A real one. Plowed, salted, familiar. A truck passed, slowed, stopped. The driver asked if I needed help. I looked back toward the trees. There were no footprints behind me. None. I got home safely. The tow truck found my car the next day, still stalled, still intact. The washout was confirmed. A few more hours and someone else might have driven into it. Here's the part I don't talk about. Sometimes, When it snows lightly at night, I'll see a figure standing far down the road, not blocking it, just watching. And I don't feel afraid. I feel assessed, like I'm being checked on, as if something that understands getting lost has decided I still belong on the path. And that's worse than being hunted, because I don't know what happens when it decides I don't anymore. Final closing tales of the darkness. If you're still listening, it means something about these stories stayed with you longer than it should have. That's how it starts. Not with fear, with recognition. These stories aren't about monsters hiding in the dark. They're about moments when the world notices you back, when silence pays attention, when routines are learned, when places remember. Most people think horror ends when the story does. It doesn't. It lingers in quiet rooms, in familiar hallways, in nights where sleep feels like a risk instead of a rest. So tonight, pay attention to sounds that arrive a second too late, to shadows that don't move when you do, to the feeling that something knows you were supposed to look away. If you want more stories like these, subscribe to Tales of the Darkness. New stories arrive regularly, and they always know when you're alone. Good night.